wish to touch upon. First of all, in relation to the red card, this is not a veto. It was never proposed as a veto. It was never envisaged to be anything as such. But the point is this, that if we have the other measures that bringing national parliaments much closer to our decision making, the fact is we will never need for any of our national parliaments ever to have to exercise a red card, let alone for it to be described anywhere near a veto. On subsidiarity, once again this has been raised by colleagues. We must evaluate subsidiarity mid-term and at the end, but those evaluations are not binding. They provide a measure to ensure that we have not moved so far away from the subsidiarity principle and that we are carrying out work at our level that we should not be doing. My Liberal colleagues raised an issue in relation to extension of the 8-week time period. I agree with them that any extension of the current deadline for submitting opinions on subsidiarity should indeed be incorporated into the treaties when they are next updated. And then very finally, I had from the extreme right of this House various comments made, and it was quite interesting for me, in particularly from the UKIP representatives who are not present here. They said that they made various points, but when it came to the technical issues, there was only two, and on both they were completely wrong. They were wrong in describing the red card as a yellow card, and I'm pretty sure that the British people will show them the red card very soon indeed. And it is not the majority of laws that are made in the UK emanating from the EU. It is 13%. That is not a majority. So I look forward to showing them the red card on the 23rd of June.
Thank you very much. That wraps up the discussion on this report. The vote will take place tomorrow. Now on the agenda we have a discussion on the objection pursuant to Rule 106 of the Rules of Procedure on the renewal of the approval of the active ingredient glyphosate. The first speaker is the rapporteur, Giovanni La Via, for 4 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente, signor.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioners, colleagues. The debate today wasn't actually foreseen on the original agenda, but I think it's a very good idea for us to look at this because it's such an important issue. It really does affect human health, animal health and the environment. So I'm very pleased that we're able to have this discussion today. In the last few months, we've witnessed intensive discussions in conjunction with the decision to renew the approval of this active ingredient. According to the regulation of placing on the market of phytosanitary goods, what happens actually is that in June 2016 this approval will run out. As you know, glyphosate is an active ingredient of a broad-spectrum herbicide. It is widely used. It is widely produced as well at a global level. In the last 40 years, it has been used in a very high percentage of cases in the agricultural sector. Now, what we need to do is look at the objection faced with us today. We are asking for that project to be withdrawn, to not renew the authorization of this product, and to look at the list of co-formulants that should not be included in commercial products. The report also asks the Commission to review independently the classification of glyphosate in the light of new scientific data in terms of its carcinogenicity and endocrine disruptive properties. So we have cross-cutting scientific evidence that we need to look at. We need to take a step back and look at what the possible impact would be of renewing this authorization. In March 2015, the IARC, International Authority for Cancer Research, said that it would probably be carcinogenic, and that there was sufficient evidence to show that it gave rise to tumours in animals in laboratories. Now, EFSA, which is the European Food Safety Authority, in contrast to that, in evaluating the same substance, said that it was probable that the elements that currently available do not justify recategorization as a carcinogenic substances, and that it was therefore probable that it was not carcinogenic. So these are two different conclusions that have been reached. So what we need to do is try and apply the principle of precaution, the precautionary principle. We need to make sure that any products on the market are not going to be a detriment to animal or human health. And we also need to ensure that member states, if they want to apply that principle, can do so. They should be free to do so when there are substantial risks to warrant that. Any time the human health or animal health or environmental health is damaged. So it's up to us to ensure that we are achieving a high level of protection of health for our consumers. And I think that I call on the Commission to do this. So I call on the Commission to withdraw this proposal and not extend the approval. Also, we should ask EFSA to provide all the data that it has and that were subject and provided a basis for its conclusions, so that we get hold of all the scientific data. Thank you. Now the Commissioner. Commissioner Jourová.
Mr. President, honourable members, allow me to recall that the right of scrutiny of the European Parliament concerns the question of whether the draft implementing act exceeds the implementing powers provided for in the Basic Act. In this respect, I would like to point out that the draft implementing regulation for renewal of the approval of glyphosate has been processed in line with the procedures set out in Regulation number 1107/2009 and Regulation number 182/2011 on comitology. The Commission considers, therefore, that it does not exceed its implementing powers. The Commission services have presented a draft implementing act to the Standing Committee in compliance with the legal framework. The Commission's services are now discussing with Member States the best way forward on the renewal of glyphosate and will endeavour to find a solution which commands the widest possible support within the Member States. The current draft implementing act is therefore likely to be amended and should not be considered as a decision from the Commission. Honourable members, before you express your position on this draft resolution, I would like to recall a few important points that were already raised when this was discussed in your Environment Committee. The draft regulation includes a firm commitment to review the approval if the European Chemicals Agency process leads to a classification relevant for the approval. Second, the Commission has started working on co-formulants. Already the current draft, if adopted, would not allow to place glyphosate-containing products on the market which contain the co-formulant toluene. The third, the Commission has called upon the industry to publish the regulatory studies submitted by companies. I refer here to the letter that Commissioner Andriukaitis recently sent to the Glyphosate Task Force. The Commission services have received the response of the applicants and are now clarifying the details with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. For the EPP group now, for 1.5 minutes, Angelique Delay.
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, Commissioner, colleagues. First of all, I'd like to remind you this is objection to an implementing act and therefore it will have no legal consequence. And the subject, however, is part of the concerns of our citizens, and at the same time the farming world is going through a terrible crisis. In Europe, a lot of farmers use glyphosate in a lot of their crop productions. It's fundamental as a herbicide. And up to now there's no viable alternative proposed to farmers guaranteeing the absence of consequences on human health. For all these reasons, this blockage between the Member States and the Commission has to find some solution. And I'd like to recall you that we have a procedure in terms of approval of substance that we as co-legislator decided on and passed. And the procedure was respected. Furthermore, in the case of new information, the Commission can always come back on its approval. And we have an analysis, a midterm analysis for the end of 2017. And I've submitted amendments on behalf of the EPP limiting the approval over time, asking the Commission and the Member States to speed up their work on the list of coformulants to be banned, like taloamine, and suggesting to the Commission measures that the Member States can implement. And we need more research and innovation to find alternatives to glyphosate. And I count on all of my colleagues to approve these proposals. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. There's a blue card question for you from our colleague Milieu. Are you prepared to take that question? Would you like to take that question?
Frau Milieu, bitte.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Sie haben
Thank you very much. You mentioned a number of points that are related to glycosides and particularly those coformulants. And also we have to take into consideration the import of fodder from third countries. This is something that has to be taken into consideration when we discuss this issue. And the question is whether, as far as prevention and the particular principle of prevention, if that is taken into consideration with the further deployment or use of glyphosates and the various coformulants. I just want to know if you have taken that into consideration. Thank you.
Chers collègues, j'espère avoir.
Yes, I think I've understood your question. I think we're going to have further debate on this before we take a definitive position.
Für die Sozialdemokratische.
The social S&D group, Mr. Pock.
Předsedo, nejsmutnější na této věci je, že tento parlament vůbec musí podat.
Thank you very much. This parliament is coming up with objections now on implementing regulations of the Commission. I think that's a great shame, actually. Perhaps we need to review the whole comitology process in the first place, because the fact that we should have to do this is already very significant. Glyphosate not leaving behind any residues, that's wrong. That's not leaving any traces in food, that's just not true. We need to take our citizens' health seriously. EFSA has used key studies to justify its conclusion, but who is funding these studies, or who funded those studies? Well, industry itself. So it's all based on a lie. Glyphosate is shown to lead to many different disorders and can lead to endocrine disruption as well. It's even patented as an antibiotic.
Ist Frau Görling im Raum?
Mrs. Görling, are you here? Yes, go ahead.
Frau Görling.
Mrs. Görling for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My group will robustly rebut this resolution. We will not be voting for it. I could give you a long speech on the use of glyphosate and how important it is to agriculture. Don't have time for that, so let me just concentrate on what I see as the failures in the resolution. The resolution states, as part of its justification, that residues of glyphosate have been found in soil and water. Well, yes, they have. But As the German Federal Risk Institute tells us, they have been found in quantities at less than 1% of the daily acceptable rate. It also states that resolutions have been found in food. Again, this is not about hazard, this is about risk, and they are at levels way below those which are acceptable to human health. So why does this form such an upfront part of this resolution when it is frankly irrelevant? It also says, under J, that the current proposal has no restrictions on use. That is not the case. The draft implementing regulation clearly states that regulatory measures to identify co-formulants must be developed. It is already there in the draft regulation. So before we even think about the use of glyphosate and its value to us, we really ought to get our facts right. And where we talk about the precautionary principle, again, the precautionary principle as enshrined in EU law is to take care of cases where there is not any scientific advice. There is a plethora of scientific advice here. That's one of the problems, that we have to choose between our own EFSA advice and IARC. And I see no reason to move away from EFSA.
Im Namen der ALDE-Fraktion spricht jetzt für anderthalb.
For ALDE, 1.5 minutes, Javier Gerbrandy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm lucky that I just checked when the public debate would be in plenary, because I just found out that it was now. But my own process was as difficult as the whole process of the authorization by the Commission. Because let's be clear, what kind of process is it when a commissioner, after tabling the authorization, is sending letters to the biggest industrial giant in this, asking for more transparency? So there have been huge difficulties. And yes, we have EFSA. We have a strong role in our decision-making process in Europe, and we count on EFSA. And EFSA is relatively clear in its statement. So my group believes that we should look very closely at what EFSA is saying. But EFSA is not saying anything about the amount of time, the amount of years that we should go for. And therefore, we just tabled an amendment as Liberal Group in which we call on the Commission to renew the approval of glyphosate with a maximum of 5 years and take into account that any new evidence up to that time which proves that it's more dangerous than we thought before, that it should be taken back, the authorization. So that is what we just tabled 20 minutes ago, and I hope that you can follow that line during the plenary vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have to apologize to two colleagues, Ms. Görling and Mr. Sani, because Mr. Sani had a blue card for you, Ms. Görling. Would you be prepared to answer it, even though we've heard from another speaker? So, Mr. Sani, if you're still prepared to ask the question, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would like to ask Mrs. Göring something, but this is part of the debate as well. So if there is so much resistance to the use of glyphosate, although global agriculture uses 50% of all cocoa production volume of glyphosate, are there alternatives? This is a huge amount. Thank you.
Frau Görling.
Thank you. If I understood that correctly, this was a question about the use of glyphosate. And I think, was it cocoa, did you say? Sorry, it didn't come across very well in the translation. Yes, there are many places, many aspects of agriculture, some of them much closer to home than cocoa in the European Union, that rely very heavily on the use of glyphosate. And in some cases there is resistance, and in some cases that's why we have a sustainable use directive, which lays out very, very clearly for farmers exactly how products such as glyphosate should be used, and if resistance is detected, what steps they should take. So I'm perfectly confident that resistance can be dealt with, but no, I'd be of no problem. We really do need glyphosate.
Thank you. Jetzt spricht im Namen.
Now, on behalf of the Greens, for 1 minute, Michael Onin.
Arvoisa puhemies, kansainvälisen syövän tutkimuskeskuksen IARC.
Now, in accordance with the IARC, the International Agency for Cancer Research, in March 2015, glyphosate was classified as a product which was probably carcinogenic for human beings. And it can be demonstrated that it is an endocrine disruptor too. But research has demonstrated AMPA as a co-formulant can also spread in the environment if it's used on the ground, and this is important in cold countries, though processes are very slow. We need information. We have information about hot climates, but not so much about cold climates.
Thank you. For the Greens, 1.5 minutes, Martin Häusling. Yes, I think it's very good that we're talking about this today. It really is a crucial issue. It's a principle that we hold very close to our hearts, and that is the precautionary principle. It's the World Health Organization, after all, that has issued this risk warning. There is a great loss of biodiversity when this substance is used. It is used on 40% of the agricultural surface area and has increased by 70%. There are traces in beer, in cereals, in wheat, and in our own bodies. And I don't care, actually, Mrs. Girling. We don't need to argue about threshold values. We just shouldn't have this substance in the first place at all. And we really need to think seriously about we should accept the fact that the Commission, after a long discussion, comes up with a recommendation to extend this by 15 years with no restrictions. So it can be used everywhere. The layman can use it. It can be used for economic reasons. The farmer will save €100 when using this. So it was purely economical. Purely economic reasons. Should we value economic reasons more than health or ecological reasons? And that's why this substance should not be renewed, the authorization of that. And also we want more transparency here. To come up with some kind of transparency initiative afterwards is no point. We want general transparency in the whole procedure right from the start. Thank you. You have a blue card from our colleague, Mr. Lisa. Are you prepared to take that? Mr. Lisa?
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Herr Kollege Häusling, Sie haben gesagt, dass die
Thank you very much. Well, there is no limitation that's been set down by the Commission. There are a number of different proposals with regard to limitations which have been proposed by the EPP, but the question is whether we're going to look at this after the resolution passes, or if it passes, in other words, if there's to be some sort of ban on glyphosate, and I don't think that that particular approach would be the right one either.
Mr. Häusling. Yes, Mr. Lisa, I think the EPP has already taken a great step forward. We've had debates in the Agricultural Committee, and I think it's an important step forward. But we have to bear in mind that there aren't just chemical alternatives to glyphosate. Glyphosate can be replaced by mechanical reasons as well, to a level of 90%. You can use a ploughing mechanism or other mechanisms, of a mechanical type. So it's not necessary. So it's a basic principle, and that is a precautionary principle.
Meine Damen und Herren, normalerweise lasse ich
Well, usually I only allow one blue card, but we have another question for you, Mr. Häusling. Is that okay? Mrs. Yusu, go ahead.
¿Me puede decir cuánto cuesta?
Can you tell me how much the plowing costs and what this means in terms of greenhouse gas effect?
Liebe Frau Kollegin, ich bewirtschafte einen Hof biologisch und ich lade
Well, first of all, there are alternatives to glyphosates, and there are instances where there are farms and undertakings that are not using any glyphosates and haven't been using for numerous decades, and it's worked out wonderfully.
Thank you. Mrs. Göring, you are on the speaking list, so I'm afraid I can't ask you to use your blue card. I'm sorry about that. Now we have Mrs. Evi for 1 minute.
Sì, grazie Presidente. Mi inserisco anche in questo.
Thank you very much. And now it's this particular debate is extremely important, and it's important to have this particular discussion in view of what's going to be discussed on Wednesday as well. Now, it's very difficult to think about reinstituting or continue this particular approval. We have to take this into consideration that it simply isn't possible. It is necessary to look at this in a very, very careful fashion, having some sort of joint position adopted with regard to this issue, because we simply cannot renew the approval for glyphosate. It is something which is not conceivable in any way, shape or form. We have to take into consideration the dangers, the endocrinological effects that it has as well. And there are numerous other studies which are to come out in the months to come. So it's really not conceivable, once again, to renew this particular approval. We have to take into consideration the effect on the environment, on aquatic life, and above all, on human life as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Efi. Now for 1.5 minutes, Maura McGuinness.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues, for this very important debate. It's been quite interesting, the correspondence I've received on this. There's been quite a large lobby to ban glyphosate, and we respect those who emailed us in that regard. But in recent days, I'm getting emails from individual farmers, and I welcome those emails, not from the farm organisations, but from individual farmers, talking to me about how vital glyphosate is for them when they are practicing conservation agriculture and trying to reduce their carbon footprint and trying to do it in a sustainable way, in a way that's positive for the environment. I think it is very easy to call for a ban on a chemical because chemicals raise concerns among our citizens. We need to reflect on exactly what's before us here. There are two apparently different scientific assessments, but in fact one, the EFSA position, looks at the risks, while the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, looks at the hazards. We need to differentiate between both of those. The position of our group, the EPP, is in my view very measured. We very much want to make sure that products are safe, but we do not want an outright ban. We support re-registration of this product, but not for 15 years, and we want actions taken if there are in the future evidence where there are concerns about it. Let's not ignore the voices that talk to us, but let's listen to all of the voices that lobby on this important issue.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Karin Kadenbach.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. We're talking about glyphosate. It's a herbicide. Well, we term it a herbicide, but actually it's not a herbicide. It is an all-inclusive herbicide because it kills plants. It kills all plants. There's no difference. It doesn't make any difference between crops, useful plants, and weeds. So Monsanto has been able to get an enzyme into these crops that are immune to the toxic. So obviously glyphosate is suitable for damaging the human body, whether it's from a carcinogenic point of view, endocrine disruptor point of view. Of course, how much are we exposed to this risk? If we just deny that there is high exposure, then we can go along with approval. But if we think that risks and also a high potential for danger, then I think we really do need to prevent this reauthorization. Mrs. Kadenbach, Mr. Bogovic wants to ask a question. Is that okay?
Also, ich kann es nochmal auf... Können Sie mich hören, Frau...
Can you hear me, Mrs. Kadenbach? There's a blue card for you. Okay, Mr. Bogovic.
Spoštovana kolegica.
Well, I'm a fruit grower, have been a fruit grower since 1986, and have been using glyphosate as one of the herbicides in fruit growing very frequently. And those of us who use it, well, we are more than interested in finding out the truth about it, and especially knowing, for instance, it's been used for 40 years, and during this use, in fact, it does not mean that we should only be thinking about the various precautionary measures. Well, the chairman interrupted the speaker.
Der Sinn des Blue Card Verfahrens ist, dass Sie der Kollege...
The point of the blue card system is that you ask a question and not actually give a speech that you would prefer to give in the catch the eye situation. Mrs. Kadenbach, I don't think there's anything to answer really, so I think we'll carry on with the speakers list. Christian Schaldemose now for 1 minute.
Ja, tak for det.
Thank you, Chair. Well, what's at stake here is that WHO cancer expert has classified glyphosate as probably a carcinogen, and EFSA concludes that glyphosate is hardly a risk for human beings. These are all two awfully different opinions about glyphosate. And this is the core of the matter here. We have these two differing assessments. So I think it is a matter of concern that if we allow this reauthorization of Roundup for another 15 years when there are two such different opinions, so I would really urge the Commission to put human health before money. We're going to have to get glyphosate thoroughly examined before we reauthorize it for another 15 years. We just can't accept anything else. Maybe it'll be difficult to find alternatives, yes, but we're going to have to get this examined. We cannot ignore the WHO's concerns.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the catch the eye procedure then. I have to just say that I've got many more people that want to take the floor than I can allow to take the floor because of the time constraints. So I'm sorry about that in advance. First of all, for 1 minute, Michaela Šodová.
Vážený pane předsedo, kolegyně a kolegové, já jsem hlasovala proto, aby se...
Thank you very much, colleagues. I wanted us to talk about this subject. I'm very pleased that we are doing that because I think consumers and citizens really should know about the kind of votes that we hold here, what we vote for. And we're talking about the authorization of chemicals in agriculture that have an impact on health. This is a huge priority, and it should take primordial place in the decision-making processes. The Czech agricultural minister and the environmental minister were consulted by myself. I contacted them, and they were also part and parcel of the decision-making process, and they said that we should support the Commission. I will also support the amendments of the EPP, where it talks about reducing the authorization for 7 years.
Garcia.
Thank you very much, President. This debate comes at an important moment because there's great uncertainty with regard to glyphosate. I think it's quite serious, the fact that some colleagues say that there are different opinions and different views. No, authorities, European authorities, which are in charge of food security, have made it quite clear indeed that there is no risk with regard to the active substance. And the German Assessment Authority and also the International Association that is in charge of cancer-related issues has also issued its opinion with regard to this. So, indeed, there is uncertainty, it appears. It is something which is used by all farmers, but this is no argument whatsoever. The argument is whether we are to believe our food regulatory agency and in charge of food safety. Are we to believe them? And the question basically lies there, and there are numerous questions which swirl around that, of course.
Richard Ashworth.
Richard Ashworth, 1 minute.
President, this House has a duty to ensure public food is safe and the environment is responsibly managed, and we must take those responsibilities very seriously indeed. But on the other hand, we must also ensure that decisions we make are strictly proportionate to risk, not to hazard, and we must be aware of the consequences of those decisions. In the case of glyphosate, a product which is endorsed by the Food Standards Agency as safe, and one for which there is no immediate substitute. For the industry to achieve the same effects, it would have to revert to more traditional mechanical operations, and I couldn't disagree more with some of the comments which were said earlier about mechanical operations, and would have to revert to greater use of other agrochemicals, and in consequence would add considerably to the cost of an industry already under great difficulty. This House must be guided by the facts and common sense, not emotion. I urge the Commission to renew approval.
Vielen Dank. Jetzt für ein
Thank you. For 1 minute now, Mariana Petri.
Gospodine predsjedniče, Međunarodna agencija za istraživanje
The International Cancer Research Agency has categorized glyphosates as probably carcinogenic. A meta-analysis of epidemiological studies of workers who use herbicides in their work have shown that they are exposed to an increased risk of B-cell lymphoma. Companies try to conceal the danger of glyphosates for our health because they want to sell GMOs, which are only competitive with the application of glyphosates. I believe that the decision on the extension of the approval of the use of glyphosate may be made only by respecting the precautionary principle. Having consulted experts who say that the analysis of glyphosate effect on human health may be done within a year, and aware of the fact that the extent of the danger of the glyphosates
now for one.
Thank you, Mr. President. The European Commission is not ready to change the current situation with glyphosate. That's why I think that the European Parliament can play a particularly important role. The Commission behaves as if nothing happened, and it even forgets the scandals, say the one related to German beer. And it doesn't really worry about the scientific research that shows that glyphosate can be dangerous to human health. Well, on the other hand, I believe it's too early to outright ban glyphosate. We know that the agricultural sector right now is in crisis, and if we ban glyphosate, we'll make things harder for farmers. That's why I believe that the best thing today would be to extend the license for glyphosate for a couple of years, and also to tighten up the rules governing the use of glyphosate. For example, we could ban the use of glyphosate just before harvesting, and we should also invest more in finding alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings the catch-eye procedure to an end. For the Commission has got a lot of questions on its plate. Mrs. Jourova, go ahead.
President, honourable members, let me repeat that the point at issue is in this debate is whether the draft implementing act exceeds the implementing powers provided for in the basic act. As I said before, the draft implementing regulation for renewal of the approval of glyphosate is consistent with the relevant regulations. The Commission considers, therefore, that this falls within its implementing powers. The Commission services will continue to discuss with Member States the best way forward on the renewal of glyphosate, seeking a solution which commands the widest possible support among Member States. The draft implementing act is, therefore, likely to be amended. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Und jetzt
Thank you. And now the rapporteur again, Giovanni La Via, for 2 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to emphasize the usefulness of a debate of this nature. And I would like to thank all of my colleagues, first of all, for the expression of the various positions on this issue. There are numerous different views, a very differentiated, if you like, approach within the Parliament on this issue. But the moment has come to find some sort of solution. We've heard in this chamber a number of different proposals expressed by the various political groups. On the one hand, the necessity to have an extension of the approval, and on the other hand, just the contrary to that, that it be pulled out of the market and out of agriculture altogether in the nearest future. So there is one thing that's certain, and there's something that we all have to be and must be aware of, that this particular product used in agriculture, that it is widely used and that it has very many positive effects, and that it has been very, very effective to a certain extent as well. And of course there are those mechanical alternatives, there are human alternatives as well as far as dealing with this. Maybe indeed that is the case, but we have to look at also the competitiveness of our production system as well, and the effectiveness on that particular front. Tomorrow we'll vote on this particular matter, and I think all ought to reflect on the various aspects of this, and furthermore, I would like to underline the role of the Food Safety Agency. And here, as has been said by our colleague Aguilera from the Socialist Group, indeed, it is the instrument that we have at our disposal, the instrument that we have right now, and we have to, of course, have trust in this particular instrument and the particular view that they have set forth on this particular matter. So I'd like to thank you all very much.
Thank
you, Mr. Giovanni La Via. A draft resolution has been submitted and will be voted on tomorrow. So that takes care of the discussions on this particular matter. And now we move on to the next item, which is short presentations of various reports. First of all, the report of Sylvie von Kaufmann on the Regulatory Fitness and Performance Programme. Go ahead. The rapporteur has the floor for 4 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, the Commission's communication on 2014 on the Programme for Regulatory Fitness and Performance, REFIT, was quite some time away. We've had REFIT since 2012. In May last year, the Commission presented a programme for better lawmaking, and now we've got a new interinstitutional agreement between the Commission, the Parliament and the Council. The REFIT programme does play a central role for the Commission's work, and it also is important in the interplay between the various institutions. And so we really do need to take a stance as the Parliament on this report, on this programme. A report was adopted at a very large majority, and it's good that Franz Timmermans, the Vice President of the Commission, was given the remit of better lawmaking, because that was a very strong signal to be sent out to our citizens. because they often see the European Union as too bureaucratic, and quite justifiably they are expecting change. The report justifiably emphasises that what we're talking about in better lawmaking is not the large number of laws or acts. What's more decisive is the quality of the laws. European legislation normally replaces 28 laws, which actually leads to less bureaucracy and ultimately enhances the single market. A dialogue with social partners, representatives from all civil society, ensures that the EU